Welcome, everyone. My name is Dalia Habib Linssen. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm the head of academic engagement at the MFA. On behalf of my collaborators, I want to thank you for joining us for this Artist Student Curator program. This is the first of two sessions this spring in which we welcome participants to learn how the look, feel, and interpretation of the MFA's galleries are shaped by contemporary artists, students, and MFA staff. We encourage you to check out our next session of this program, which will take place on April 29th, as we look at the galleries of the art of ancient Greece, Rome, and the Byzantine Empire. So if we could have the next slide, please, Sophia. Thank you. Although I'm not physically there now, we would like to acknowledge that the Museum of Fine Arts, MFA, is in Boston, Massachusetts. Founded in 1870, the MFA stands on a site which has long served as a place of meeting and exchange among different Algonquin nations, including the Massachusetts. As a museum, we acknowledge the long histories of the land we occupy today, and we seek ways to make Indigenous narratives more prominent in our galleries and our programming. We should note that this land acknowledgement is being actively discussed and reevaluated to be a more actionable statement that reflects our current commitments and collaborations. If we could have the next slide, please. Thank you. Before we get started with our program, I would like to acknowledge a few housekeeping items. As you'll note in this portion of the program is being recorded, and the resulting video we anticipate being available later this year. We should also note that when the recording is taking place, you're welcome to turn off your video and mute your audio in order not to be included, as the majority of the recording will only show the presenter. We'd also like to remind you that a transcript and closed captions for this program are available through Rev for Zoom Live captions, and instructions on how to activate those captions are here in this second bullet point, which many of you are probably familiar with by now through using Zoom over these last couple of years, but you'll simply use the up arrow at the bottom of your toolbox screen on Zoom and click show subtitle. During the presentation, we encourage you to use the chat function in Zoom to ask questions and share comments as well. It's with very hearty thanks that we offer gratitude to Sophia Walter for her technical support and organization of today's program. Please do write in the chat should you have any questions about any technical aspect that we can support you with. So if we could go to the next slide, please. This next slide presents us with an overview of the program tonight, which is a continuation of a program that we first launched in the summer of 2020 that explored how artists, designers, students, and museum staff were responding to multiple crises, from the global pandemic and related economic uncertainty to heightened social and racial tensions in our country. This spring, we're continuing the format of the Artist Student Curator program that explores a new set of questions about how museums work. In doing so, we seek to amplify the viewpoints of college students, artists, and MFA staff across departments to learn about the collaborative nature of work in museums and to foster dialogue across communities of artistic production, academia, and the MFA. For this session, we have the great fortune of being able to explore the development of a soon-to-open gallery in the MFA's Art of the Americas wing, dedicated to art and jazz, through the triangulated perspectives of a local college student, a local professor and musician, and an MFA curator. So to get things started, we will hear an overview of the gallery by Nonie Gadsden, who's the Katharine Weems Senior Curator of American Decorative Arts and Sculpture. That will contextualize the gallery in the space of the museum and outline some of the major themes as well as key objects that will be featured in the space. That will be followed by a free-flowing conversation with Nonie alongside George W. Russell Jr., the Chair of Harmony and Jazz Composition Department at Berklee College of Music, and Christiana Larracuente, a student at Boston University and an IDEAL intern, IDEAL intern, of the Decorative Arts Trust. As previously confirmed with tonight's speakers, our discussion will in the spirit of jazz itself, be improvisational in format, whereby I'll pose some questions to our panel and we'll see where the conversation takes us. We very much want to encourage participation among our audience, and we've dedicated time for questions and discussion. So please do include your thoughts and questions in the chat as the program proceeds, and we'll do our very best to address them. And we look forward to a really exciting conversation. So with that, if we could please have the next slide, Sophia, it is my great pleasure to turn it over to Nonie Gadsden.
Thank you so much, Dalia. And yes, I would like to thank George Russell and Christiana Larracuente for being here. Christiana, you have definitely been an ideal intern, whether it's IDEAL or not. This has been a project that has been a lot of fun to work on, and I'm happy to share with others tonight. To situate you and give you a sense of what we're doing, the Art of the Americas wing has 4 floors for the art of North, Central, and South America. We're talking about one gallery on the top level, as you see here, level 3 of the Art of the Americas wing. Could I have the next slide? My colleagues in the Art of the Americas and I will be reinstalling this entire floor, so a suite of 7 galleries. We start that reinstallation in a few weeks, and it will open by the end of May. And we are rethinking all of the galleries of 20th century art in the Americas. This is an amazing opportunity for us for these. And what we're going to be doing is that these side galleries, so the side 6 galleries that you see on this plan, are going to become quote unquote permanent galleries. They're going to be our general collection displays. But we still have a voice and an opinion and a message that we're trying to get across in them. The central gallery, where you see the words "Women Take the Floor," which is the exhibition that just went down and we will be replacing, that central gallery will have a rotating exhibition every year. And the opening exhibition in that gallery is called Touching Roots, Black Ancestral Legacies in the Arts. And so the side 6 galleries, you'll see where the Art and Jazz Gallery is, Gallery 326, the Axelrod Gallery. And when we were asked to think about permanent galleries, which means we plan for a 4 or 5 year run minimum of space, we were asked, my colleagues and I were challenged to come up with a way of using our existing icons in our collection that we are known for, that people come from afar to see, whether they be Jackson Pollock or Edward Hopper or Arthur Dove or Charles Sheeler, but bring new voices into that conversation, to bring new narratives and new ways of looking at these icons of our collection through the lens of some other artists or through other lens of other perspectives. So that is what we were challenged with. And I had some additional challenges when thinking about Gallery 326, because that gallery has some additional restrictions on it. Not only does it have existing casework that we would have to work with, we weren't going to be changing any of the format of the gallery, but it also is a gallery that has a restriction for the first 25 years of the Art of the Americas wing. It must show art of the 1920s and art and design of the 1920s and 30s. So those are the parameters from which I was working. And these are all important things to get across when trying to explain a gallery, because it's not just me sitting down and saying, what do I want to do from everything in the world? It's what can we do well within the parameters that are set, and what are we trying to get across? We're trying to contextualize it. So you'll see that my colleagues in Art of the Americas and I have worked out a suite of different topics, which we're seeing as sort of, we're calling it stories artists tell. And we're seeing it as an episodic way of telling chapters in American history of the art of the Americas of the 20th century. We're trying to emphasize that there isn't just one history of American art or art in the Americas, that there are multiple different histories and multiple different perspectives. And here we're telling some of those as we go. from War and Spirituality, which will look at artists responding to World War II, and both looking at both abstraction and figuration. A little bit of the Southwest is exactly that, not trying to show the whole realm of the Southwest, but showing the Southwestern art from an indigenous perspective. It will only include artwork by Native American artists from the Southwest, and showing some of the work that we can tell from our collection. You see art and jazz, which we'll go for more further. On the other side, nature abstracted, looking at different ways artists have looked at nature itself, abstracted it to try to tell a different story. Figurative art in Latin America, and then folk art meets modernism in Gallery 336. All of these are exploring different concepts that we're trying to sort of look at a little bit more broadly amongst all of our colleagues in the Art of the Americas and our colleagues more broadly. Could I have the next slide, please? So what do we have in our collection of the 1920s and 30s, which should hopefully be a little decorative arts object heavy, because we've got a lot of casework to fill that we can use in building this gallery. And I looked at the strengths of our collection. And one strength of our collection is American modern design of the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, which I represent here by our iconic jazz bowl designed by Victor Schreckengast. This was done, I have on the slide 1931, and actually was done in 1930. That's my fault. I haven't corrected that in a long time. But this is a punch bowl for which the young artist and musician, jazz musician, saxophone player, Victor Schreckengast, was given a commission to make something with a New Yorkish theme. And he didn't know the name of his, who was commissioning this. And he decided to represent a recent night on the town that he had in New York City, because for him, New York City was nightlife. New York City was jazz, it was skyscrapers, it was electric lights, it was this sort of movement. And he originally named this the bowl, the New Yorker. It has become known as the Jazz Bowl because the word jazz is written, as you can see there on the side. But taking from this, this sense of modernity and the sense that modernity equals jazz, playing on that. If you go to the next slide, another major strength of our collection of this era is a relatively new collection in the museum's holdings, and that is the art of African-American artists of the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. This was, interestingly, both of these collections stemmed from one collector, John Axelrod, here in Boston, who took a deep dive into this time, which he calls in between the wars, between World War I and World War II, and looks at the design is where he started, looking at the furnishings and the furniture and objects, and then expanding into sculpture, and particularly interested in the work of African-American artists working in this time period. This particular piece, the Norman Lewis Harlem Jazz Jamboree, is not from the Axelrod collection. However, you'll be seeing other works that did come from the Axelrod collection. But this gives you a great side. So where do these two major collections overlap? And one of the great ways of doing that, while wanting to privilege the Black artists that we have in our collection, is by focusing on one of the great major influences of Black American artists on the larger American society in the early 20th century, which is the evolution of jazz, the creation of jazz music, which affected everybody and everywhere. So taking this concept of the impact of jazz, not only on music, the music world, but also on the art world, on literature, on poetry, and on the concept of modernity. That's where we started in this whole exploration. Can I have the next slide, please? But of course, I could tell you about the art part, but I could not tell you a thing about the jazz part. I knew jazz, but not really well. So I knew that I needed to find some other voices, some other folks to help me bring a different perspective. Another perspective that I couldn't bring to this is the Black American perspective. I am obviously not a Black American. And so it would really behoove me to reach out and find other voices to help me tell this story. And boy, was I lucky. I found George W. Russell Jr., who is one of our speakers here tonight, who came, actually it was Dalia who recommended that I explore him. And when I researched George, I learned that he was an award-winning teacher, which means that he could probably even make me understand jazz. And he was a beloved personality and a practicing jazz musician with the George W. Russell Jr. Trio. And that was important to me as well, that he was a practicing artist working in live jazz at this time. And he was at Berklee, which was right down the street. So, this seemed like it might be feasible. And luckily for me, George got excited by this topic as well. And at the same time, I applied for funding to support an internship for this project from the Decorative Arts Trust, a national organization that explores decorative arts of all time periods and eras. And the IDEAL internship, which stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Access, and Leadership. This is the inaugural year of the Decorative Arts Trust internship. And they supported us at the MFA, along with 3 other internships at other organizations around the country. And we found Christiana. And Christiana, in her application, submitted an essay about the intersections of hip hop music and art in the MFA's recent Basquiat exhibition. And right there, I knew she was the one. She was bringing art and music together. And that's what we were going to try to do here in this exhibition. So together, the 3 of us have gathered objects and talked through different interpretive strategies. We looked at different challenges that we'll talk about a little bit more tonight. And because this is a massive project, this usually meant that I would propose something for us to discuss. And for, somebody had to put the ball out there, get the ball rolling. And I would get George and Christiana to react to it, to question it, to tweak it, or completely reject it. So that's sort of how the dynamic went. And they can tell you if it was different. They have their own perspectives. But that's the start. So if you get the next slide. So the gallery overall explores several things. It explores images of people and performances of jazz, as you see here in the Gian Milli photograph of Billie Holiday singing in this image called First Jam, or Norman Lewis's more abstract version of the Harlem Jazz Jamboree, in which you see the Black artists as the musicians and the white members of the community as the spectators. But what an intimate group this was like in the center of sort of crowded in amongst each other in this display. And then a work by Alan Crite called Bass Violin Player, which Alan Crite is a Boston-based artist. And this is a loan that we are getting very generously from the Boston Athenaeum. And Crite was very much interested in showing the Boston community and representing the Boston community and all of its diversity, particularly of the African-American community in Boston. Crite, however, was not necessarily interested in jazz. His mother was actively anti-jazz. And I wanted to include this to both show a Black musician physically in the gallery, but also to raise the concept of that the Black community did not all view jazz the same. There were different perspectives on jazz. Some loved it and thought it was fantastic. Some thought it was the devil's music. There was different perspectives, and not everybody agreed. The bottom row of images are all artists working in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s who tried to interpret jazz into visual form. And so this is a range of artists that we see here. And this will come up again. We'll talk to you a little bit more about how we're taking this concept of artists trying to visualize jazz and we're turning the tables on that. So I'll come back to that in a second. The next slide. We're also looking more broadly at how jazz really, the trappings of jazz culture, of nightlife, of, that jazz became equal with modernity, was synonymous with modernity at the time. So for the nightlife concept, we'll have cocktail sets, the radio was a new medium at the time and was one of the ways that jazz became such a national phenomenon by exposing so many people to the music of jazz itself. And then on the bottom section, looking at sort of the fashion of jazz and the culture of jazz through both some interiors such as Motley's fabulous cocktails painting, as well as some fashion and an interior setting that we are creating in the gallery. The next slide will show you an overall floor plan of the gallery. For those of you who can read floor plans, it's some people find the spatial reading difficult. Some others, will have a little bit more difficulty. But if you know this gallery, we're not changing any of the interior trappings. We have all the same casework and all the same walls. So here we're working within those restrictions to build out the space. And the next slide will give you a sense of how some of this is coming together in our renderings. On the right, you'll see the nightlife case in which we bring together both cocktail sets, cigarette paraphernalia, and radios, and a phonograph, all showing this sort of how jazz was being influenced on and nightlife was influencing a broader culture. On the right side, we look at works of art by Black artists who are balancing the pressures between abstraction and realism at this time. The Crite of the bass violin player and the Walter Simon painting that is much more abstract. But as George will explain, we can see a jazz connection in there as well. In the middle, you'll see the case full of work, jewelry by Art Smith, a Black jeweler, studio jeweler who worked in Greenwich Village in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, who was very much a jazz enthusiast and thought a lot about rhythm and movement in creating his works of jewelry as well. So it's a broad range. We're really taking a broad look at the impact on jazz on art and society at this time. So with that, Dalia, I'll pass it back over to you.
That is so exciting, Nonie. This really excited to come see the space. And the intersection of different viewpoints really enriches, I think, what is going to be a really thoughtful and thought-provoking interdisciplinary look at this period in American culture. So my first question is maybe if I could direct it to George and Christiana. Nonie, you've really kindly and thoroughly told us a lot about how this project was initiated and about the constraints with which you had to work in developing the construct for this gallery. And you also told us a little bit about the process leading to working with George and Christiana. And I wonder if I could turn it over to George and Christiana, who might be able to share with us a little bit about not necessarily how you became involved with the gallery, but share with us why. In other words, when the opportunity came across your desk, what went through your minds in terms of the internship opportunity, in your case, Christiana, or for you, George, the invitation that you received from Nonie to collaborate. So maybe we could start with Christiana.
Well, thank you, Dalia. I think that, well, what came to mind when I saw, so I go to Boston University, obviously, and they usually send out a bunch of like mass emails when different opportunities are brought in from various sources. So one day I just randomly came across this internship that kind of had this intersection between music and art. And for me, that was something that I'm deeply interested in. Like Nonie had previously mentioned, on my application, I had included this gallery review I wrote about the hip hop generation of Basquiat. That was at the MFA. So when I saw that there was opportunity to be a part of something that was bringing those two worlds together, I was like, yeah, that's something that's me. I applied. Did I necessarily think I was going to get it? No, but I did. And I was more than happy to be a part of this process. I couldn't have imagined the experience I've been afforded through this internship. And I've been so happy to collaborate with both Nonie and George. Every week, whenever we've met, it's always been a lot of open dialogue where all three of our voices are equally as heard, and our insights are used in the ways that benefit the gallery and kind of explore this relationship that we're trying to bring to light. So I wanted to be a part of something that was bigger than myself. I wanted to bring voices to the people who started this culture, African Americans who put in so much years of work that at the time may not have been recognized, and now they definitely deserve to receive their flowers. So those are some of the many reasons why I've been more than happy to be a part of this.
Awesome. And we're all much more fortunate that you did decide to do it. So thank you. It's been a real pleasure to be able to work together and to learn a little bit from you about the development of the gallery from your perspective. So really thrilled and particularly grateful to you for taking this time out in what is a really, really, really busy time as you finish up your last semester of college and look toward major decisions about the next steps in your career. So thank you. So George, I wonder if we could turn it over to you. What went through your mind when you saw this opportunity?
Well, what went through my mind was, first of all, I should say that I easily get over 200 emails a day. And wow. What first went through my mind was, do I want to read this email from this person? That was the first thing that went through my mind. After I made the decision to read the email, I was glad that I did, because Nonie from the first email painted such a wonderful picture of an opportunity that excited me. I am married to a woman who's an artist, and so I've always been, art is always around, and I've always had an appreciation for it, but I've always kind of shied away from art because I felt like I just didn't get it, and I thought, oh, here's an opportunity that would help me to get it. And when in doubt, I could just start talking about jazz and it would be okay if I didn't get it. So that was intriguing. But the idea that I can be involved in a process like this that could highlight these two art forms together and then share it with other people, and it was exciting to me. So those were the thoughts that went through my mind, and that is how I became a part of this wonderful project.
That's fantastic. And we're so lucky that you did. I think one of the most amazing aspects of both this gallery and the ensuing collaboration is that it was really grounded in this idea of interdisciplinary research and collaboration. In so much the way that jazz, as Nonie, you indicated earlier, was a really powerful cultural force, right, that permeated so many aspects of American culture. And so I think as we turn our attention to thinking about the interdisciplinary approach with which you have developed the framework for this gallery, like even before any of the objects were selected and really before some of the kind of major themes were articulated, it was really designed very intentionally through this interdisciplinary lens, and specifically in terms of music and visual art. So I wonder from each of your perspectives, if you could speak to this notion about how that, cross-disciplinary approach sheds new light on creative expression during this period. In other words, what do we learn from this period by putting together, right, two different interdisciplinary perspectives that I think traditionally we put in different boxes, right? We have like these departments of music and departments of art history and departments, that we can often construct in, putting sort of barriers between these forms of creative expression. And I wonder from your point of view, how bringing them together sheds new light on the sort of larger creative expression of this period. So Nonie, maybe we could start with you.
Oh man, come on, that's a big one. Sure, I'd be happy to answer. I went into this, as I said, with a little bit more knowledge in the art side than the jazz side. And I will admit, though I went along with George and said, of course, I wasn't familiar with the evolution of jazz. I wasn't familiar with the different styles and stages of jazz. And Christiana and I had this fabulous afternoon that we sat in his office at Berklee, and George walked us through principles of jazz, which I'm still trying to wrap my head around. He's like, you hear this? You hear this? I'm trying. But then also the transitions over time. And to me, that struck me so much, because you can see this transitions, or I believe you could see the transitions in styles of jazz music in the art itself. You could see the move from more swing music of the big band era to the more sort of frenetic bebop era, where things are just faster and there's more sort of a frenetic feel to it. It's just a virtuoso sense. And to me, once George was explaining that, I suddenly started seeing it more in the art itself, and getting a sense of, and also understanding that why some of those transitions happened, or some of the Black artists in particular were trying to make it, to advance you can say this better than I, George, but trying to make it harder, trying to set that the imitators, usually often white musicians, were not, they were taking this step up, making it the improv harder, making it faster, making it more complicated, and what that means in the transitions within the art as well.
That's really fascinating. Sometimes it's that understanding the sort of formal elements of another form of practice that can be so illuminating. George, what do you think?
Well, we all know that art hits us in different ways. And when I say art, I mean all the arts. Music hits you in a certain way. How many times have you heard a song and it reminded you of the first time you heard that song, or the song you heard continuously during a period of your life, and it stays with you? And art similarly. But with this exhibit, it just puts a magnifying glass on the relationship between art and jazz, and how they feed off of each other, and how they've done so throughout the years. And that was even more enlightening as we went through the process. First time I went to meet with Nonie and Christiana, we looked at the Jazz Bowl, and we talked about that Jazz Bowl for an hour, and I actually had never done that before. Wow. And we looked closely and what it represented and where it came from and how many there were, and it was fascinating. And we looked at other pieces of art like that as we went. And as Nonie was saying, you could see the parallel between what the artist had created and the time of the music that he created, and how they just went right with each other. And so putting a magnifying glass on that process and I'm excited about, and I have been excited about.
Yeah, we can feel the enthusiasm. We're excited to see it in the galleries too. And I love how you're describing this kind of this really intentional approach to putting in dialogue these forms of expression that in their own context had already been working together, right? And so the work of the museum is really to kind of recreate that context. And I'm wondering, Christiana, from your vantage point, as someone who is so interested in both sides, or two sides of the same coin, perhaps we could even say, around the, jazz in American culture, what did you gain from this perspective and sort of bringing this interdisciplinary approach?
I think similar to the sentiment that George expressed, where there's a dialogue between the visual and the jazz, the instruments. I think for me, I was able to explore the relationships between the two that came out of a community that fostered them. I think jazz culture, we often think of jazz as such a binary thing. We think of visual art as a binary thing. We think there's only one road to each. And in actuality, jazz culture created this environment that allowed for both of them to feed off of one another, whether it was a musician looking at a painting and making a music, or was it a visual artist going to these clubs, going to these sessions and hearing it and basing their work off of that. It's the sense of community that was built out of jazz. That is what really got out of the way that we're exploring it within the gallery. I think when we think of them as separate entities, it makes it harder to develop on what was actually going on in that time between these different artists and their different art forms, and how it was happening throughout the country. I think we often think of jazz as just born in New York, and we don't see it in the places that it was coming from. New Orleans, it was coming from Chicago, it was coming from Boston, it was coming far and wide, internationally, nationally. So being able to bring those two ideas together, that it was more than just jazz was happening on this side of the city, art was happening. No, they're working together. It wasn't just artists looking at musicians and being like, okay, I want to copy what they're doing and I want to bring it to visuals. It was a community, it was a friendship. And for instance, Art Smith, his Galaxy necklace, that necklace was built out of his experiences living in Greenwich Village, where his workshop was based, where like other artists like Buford Delaney and Stuart Davis, they were friends, and they kind of built their relationships between their different abstractions and realism and changing the way that they worked based off of the community that they were afforded through jazz culture. So I think that's something that was able to come out of this gallery really well. And I hope that people are able to take that away when they come and see it soon.
It's a powerful idea, this notion of networks, not something that that often gets into those kind of like shorter summaries, right, around jazz, which can often be so geographically focused on, certain parts of the United States, like New York, like Chicago. And with that, I wonder if you all might be able to share with us a little bit about the local significance in this gallery, in particular, the role that jazz played in Boston, which I think for many visitors to the gallery is going to be a really wonderful learning opportunity. So I don't know, maybe whoever wants to start with that, go for it.
Sophie, I'd like to go back and I'll address that other question also. I want to go back to point out something that was really important. Christiana alluded to it, and that is, this was all an organic thing. This wasn't like, okay, I'm going to play these fast notes here and then you do that there. It wasn't that. It was, as with most African-American or African-based art forms, it was like about the community. It wasn't like, I'm an artist and you are the audience, so you sit and listen to me. It wasn't that way at all. It was like, we are all in this together. And that's really what helped to create this beautiful art, whether it be music or art, or really all the arts. And so I didn't want that, I wanted to make sure that message was heard, and you can feel that even when you're looking at the music, listening to the music or looking at the art.
But I'm just going to jump in there too, George, before we get on to the next question, which I even forgot already. But that is my interest. My interest in art is how it can help tell us about the community that created it, the society that was around it, how we can learn about those interconnections of people. What stories can it tell? And for me, just the bringing together, there have been exhibitions about art and jazz in the past, but it's focused primarily on painting and not looked at jazz's influence on the larger culture. And Sophia, if you could go to the next slide. The slide shows one of the things that we're trying to bring out in this gallery is the Black American influence on the concept of modernity. So my wonderful colleague, Theo Tyson, who is our curator of fashion, became involved in this exhibition. And she was really interested in sharing, okay, so Black Americans created jazz and it became sort of picked up throughout the rest of the society culture and imitated and appropriated in many ways. But that wasn't the only thing. There were many aspects of the Black culture that became part of mainstream society. And that would include fashion, that would include hairstyles such as the bob or the finger waves or so forth. So we're trying to bring that out a little bit more. And now I remember, Dalia, what your question was, which is about location. And I will give all the credit for that to George. George said, I am not working on a gallery about jazz in Boston without talking about the history of jazz in Boston and the importance of Boston to jazz history. And that posed a problem, not a problem or challenge. It posed a challenge because our collection doesn't necessarily reflect that. Our collection is very New York centered. So working with George and Christiana, we tried to figure out ways of bringing in the Boston story and bringing in that information. And I'll let George take it from here, or Christiana, either one.
Well, what I will say, Dalia, is of course, Boston has a rich tradition of jazz throughout the years. And one of the things that I'm really excited about with this exhibit is the fact that we will be showing how musicians share their take on the art that is displayed in the exhibit. First, by allowing a number of both local and international musicians who are originally from Boston to be a part of writing the labels. In addition, there's going to be another phase where we're going to have, and this is probably a more exciting phase for me, we're going to have an audio guide that will include spontaneous improvisation based upon how that musician is seeing the art. And so I am over the moon about that because I think it'll just provide such a rich experience for anyone who comes in to see the art. They'll be able to see the art, they'll be able to hear the music as they're looking at the art that the music was created for on the spot. And so, I don't know how much more I want to add there, but that's one of the big things about this project that I'm excited about.
Super exciting. Yeah, it really has a way of activating, right? The sort of interconnections between the visual art and the musical art. Absolutely. And it'll be really be able to bring them into the space and create that, or in some ways recreate that sense of connectivity and community that you all have been talking about as well. And I do think we may have a slide of the photographs of the musicians who will be coming into the space in this improvisational approach. Really, really, really exciting.
So George has a lot of buddies. He's got a lot of friends. And we have definitely benefited from that because he has brought this phenomenal cast of very prominent jazz personalities in Boston and nationally and internationally known to the table. And all of them, not a single person that we contacted said no. And I swear that's because of George, because George was asking. And hey, George, I'm recognizing you're wearing that same shirt.
Yeah,
yeah, for your picture. But the responses that each of these artists have given in the labels they've written are very personal and often relate to the history of jazz in Boston and bringing in those voices and making sure people are familiar with the role that Boston had as being a center of experimentation and teaching in jazz. And the teaching, so much of that was at Berklee itself. And so many of these artists on the screen are associated with Berklee College of Music. But it became a real hub for experimentation and teaching of jazz. So that is a wonderful thing to get these fabulous people to take a little bit of their time out of their busy schedules to contribute to this as well.
Really, really exciting. And it seems only appropriate to kind of bring them together in the spirit of gathering and community and experimentation and improvisation in the space of the art itself. That is really, really exciting. We look forward to that. And it's really nice too that it's not just a one-time performance, but that these will be recordings that visitors and viewers online can access at any point. And so you can have that experience of listening and looking at the same time, which is really exciting.
And I should also mention that we have asked George to curate a playlist that will be playing ambient music they'll be playing in the gallery that will explore the evolution of jazz over the years and show the different styles from the 20s of the big band era, 20s, 30s big band era swing, to the bebop of the 40s, to the cool jazz of the 50s. Help me out here, George. Am I getting this right?
You're doing pretty good.
All right. So you'll be able to hear that transition as you spend time in the gallery, and I hope that it'll encourage people to spend more time looking and listening.
Really, really exciting. And you've each talked in different ways about aspects of this gallery that you are really looking forward to seeing kind of realized, right, in sort of three-dimensional space. For you, Nonie, you talked about this notion of transitions musically and being able to make a kind of conceptual bridge into the visual art, and to be able to see that manifested through becoming more attuned to the sort of sounds and the transitions in the sound. And George, you talked about being able to explore that idea of the visual and the musical together, and really seeing that kind of dialogue at play. And Christiana, you talked so eloquently about community and presence, and why this work really matters in terms of seeing it as a deeply interdisciplinary project from the outset, right? And one that's really about networks and communities. So I'm wondering, as you consider the themes of the gallery, what you're most excited about in terms of what this gallery can do, what objects do you think most effectively convey some of these ideas? Christiana, what do you think? What objects are you most excited about in terms of, or narratives or works of art, are you excited about sharing in this gallery?
So I think for me, like a painting in particular that we've been dealing with since maybe our second or third session working with George and Nonie, it was Archibald Motley's Cocktails. And that we use that painting as a way to get George into a visual analysis. And from that, that's kind of where I fell in love with its presence in this gallery. Although I love the painting outside of the gallery, it's obviously, it is one of the most well-known Motley paintings of all time, but its relationship in the gallery really stood out to me. I think understanding the representation that Motley brought to the forefront. These weren't being seen by Black women. African-American women were not put into a scenario where they were seen as higher class, upper class. It's sad, but it's true that African-Americans often see themselves in visual representations of trauma. And so Motley kind of flips that narrative on its head and brings them into a scenario where they're being placed at the forefront during the time of Prohibition, drinking cocktails. This is showing the elevated status that they have. It's showing that the possibility of varying skin tones from very dark women to very light women all coming together at this table. And it's also showing the modernity of women. It's showing the independence of women. It's showing the evolution and the ability to come out of oppression and kind of build this community within themselves. I was actually learning as you all know, I'm still a student, so I was learning in my Latin American art history class that what they used to do to like Afro-Latinos in Afro-Latinx in Latin America during colonization and conquest, they would remove various details from their face. They wanted them to all look the same. They wanted to take away their individuality and kind of make them into this monolithic entity. They wanted them to be all one thing. And Motley uses that same thing where he doesn't necessarily give too much detail into the face of these women. They all kind of look the same from the face, but he's doing that for a different reason. He wanted to show the capability, the possibility for all African-American women, all African-Americans in general. It wasn't to suppress them, but it was to show that we're all capable of being something more than what we are seen by white America. And so I think it's it's really important to tell that story, especially in this gallery, because it's dealing during a time that jazz is on the uprise. It's coming into different areas, especially, and this is also from a perspective of being in Chicago. So it's taking away from just being viewed as a New York art form, and it's bringing to different aspects of the country. And it's also bringing a multitude of ideas into one painting, which I really enjoy. It's been something really important to me. It will be featured in the slideshow. The slideshow I'm writing for the museum website for the gallery. So yeah, it's a very important piece of artwork for myself and to the gallery as a whole.
Really fantastic. I'm not sure how you're going to get all that into 150 words, but I hope it does end up in the label and that we'll get to hear your insights about this work for years to come. So I wonder, George, if we could turn it to you. Is there an object that you feel really helps convey the important narratives in this gallery, or objects? Oh, I think you might be on mute.
Well, I already mentioned earlier about the musicians' involvement and how they were able to share their point of view, but what was also striking was the Jazz Bowl, and I was going to mention the Archibald painting also. And one of the other takes I got from this painting is it brings to the forefront although African Americans lived a very, very difficult lives, they still found the time to celebrate and rise above the difficulties that life may have brought them, and enjoy fellowship with each other and enjoy having a good time in spite of it all. You know, and the arts, particularly music, has been so very, very important in that. Whether we're talking about back in the day when we were slaves, when we were singing the field hollers or the blues and the spirituals, all the way through until even right now to hip hop. Music has been that one source that has always been there. And, you know, we use it to celebrate, we use it to sing the blues, we use it to worship God, all those things that are so attached to the African-American community allow us to just rise above it. And so that picture kind of represents that for me also when I see that.
That's really great. Maybe we'll have to have two labels for this one. But I think what you've conveyed in that that communal experience, right, that music can provide, and visual art, it's so critical, and really appreciate that perspective too. Nonie, what do you think? What's one work that you think you're really excited to share? And then we'll turn it over for our audience to ask questions.
Sure. I'll take it to the next slide. And this is a painting by Walter Simon that I remember we looked at these same two paintings on the same day with George and Christiana. And we started with the Motley, which is a little bit easier because you're seeing people and you can construct a scene. You can try to imagine what's going on there, though that is a very enigmatic scene. We're not exactly sure what's going on there. But then we walked over to this painting, which is a lot harder to get into. And I found myself, you know, I'm not a painting scholar. I don't generally work with paintings. I work with objects. But it's called 715 Washington Street, Greenwich Village. And this is Walter Simon showing his home and sort of deconstructing it in a cubist way. But the more I heard George talking about this transition from the swing music, the joyful swing music and dance music, that was bebop. I'm sorry, that was the big band. And then this transition to bebop, which basically abandons the concept of jazz as dance music and takes it to a new level of being art for appreciation, art for connoisseurs. You have to sit and listen to it. It's not to dance and boogie to it, do the jitterbug, the Charleston, or whatever, like they were for swing music. I see that transition between these two objects, these two that we just looked at, the Motley, and then the transition to the more complicated Simon. And you can look at the sort of improvisation that you are there, as much as this might be very well planned. But you have these spots of highlights of the reds. And then in the center there, you see this rough section. He's incorporated sand into that, and just the sort of the movement and the energy and the excitement, and the idea of offering different perspectives, literally different perspectives of the same piece. So that got me looking at this, both the concept of it related to jazz, but also the concept of what the three of us were bringing together and offering different perspectives gave me a whole new perspective on this work.
It's amazing. Thank you very, very much. And I love the focus on form and the focus on bringing us back to this kind of collaborative approach with which you've taken on this gallery. So I feel like I could talk to you all forever, but I know we have some folks in the audience who might have some questions or comments for you. So I wonder if we can, if anyone does have a question or comment, you can certainly feel free to use that raise hand function, or just go ahead and unmute in the spirit of being improvisational, and share with us your thoughts or question, or certainly included in the chat box as well. So it looks like in the chat, we might have a link to, perhaps this is a publication. It's an Amazon, a link to an Amazon book. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts that they might want to share? I have one if we don't have one from our invited guests, but oh, here we go. Okay, we have a question. Phoebe, please go ahead and unmute.
Hi, first I just wanted to say thank you all for taking the time to talk to us today. This has been very interesting. My question mainly centers around how you are including women artists in this gallery. I'd really like to know about that.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. As the leading curator on Women Take the Floor, the preceding exhibition in this space, this has very much been on my mind, and struggling with the concept that our collection doesn't necessarily support that. One of the paintings that you saw, Charmian van Wiegen, is a woman artist looking at, it's called City Rhythms, looking at the rhythm of the city and looking at jazz influence on art. But we're also trying to bring in, by showing the fashion and the style of the jazz culture and the influence of African-American women on fashion in general, trying to bring in some of those stories to bring in both aspects of gender. Oops, yeah, and things like what you see here. Admittedly, we will not have, it won't be 50-50 parity of our galleries. And that's something that bothers me for sure, because I put a stake in the ground with Women Take the Floor. I feel like I did, but we're trying to bring in those perspectives through some of how these objects were used, not only through who made them, but also who owned them and how they were used. And as well as bringing in the perspectives of the female musicians that we have incorporated as well.
Thank you for the question, Phoebe, and for the response, Nonie. And I'm mindful of time and knowing that many of us have to head off here in a minute. So I want to take this opportunity to offer my extreme gratitude to my colleagues here on screen and to Sophia Walter for helping us get tonight's program organized, and very much look forward to seeing the gallery all together when we can gather in the space and listen and be a part of that really exhilarating time in American culture and history. So to close things out, we are always seeking to do things better and to engage feedback from our audiences. So we have a survey that Sophia will kindly put into the chat. We really welcome your feedback and your thoughts and appreciate your time. And in the coming days, please expect an email from us with a copy of the evaluation. If you don't have a chance to fill it out tonight, you're welcome to do so in the coming days. And we'll also include more information about programs that we're doing with college audiences in the area centered on art and learning. And just invite you to stay in touch. So thank you very, very much for joining us. Thank you, George. Thank you, Christiana. Thank you very much, Nonie. Yes, a hearty round of applause. We really appreciate it and wish you all the best.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
And,
Dalia.
I am very grateful for George and Christiana for participating in this tonight. So thank you.
And we are grateful for you sending us those emails,
Yeah.
inviting us.
All right, y'all.
Dalia, I wanted to tell you what a great job you did at leading us through this last hour.
Oh, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. I learned so much. I really appreciate being a part of it. Thank you, Christiana, for being here with us on really busy time in your life.
I've been more than happy to contribute and to listen, and I appreciate to be invited. So thank you.
And George, you want to say hi to your mom?
Hi, Mom.